Let's talk to one of those politicians, James Sunderland, Conservative from Bracknell. He is Colonel James Sunderland, and I'm sure, James, you're as appalled as everybody else in regard to what has happened with the infected blood scandal, this report that's come out today. But there are many people like Jackie, many other callers who've rung us, texters, tweeters, many other listeners who really think, why didn't successive governments get a grip on this, listen to the victims and really investigate what was happening at the time?
Yeah, hi, Peter. It's a very hard question to answer. I went into politics to be a force for good, to do my job. I did 27 years of military service. So, my own intentions are very honourable. And it is very difficult where, as a new politician, you are presented with evidence of previous failings from predecessors. So what can I tell you now? I think it's absolutely right that this government has grasped a nettle. The Prime Minister is making a statement in the House of Commons in a minute. It is absolutely right that there's been an investigation, and it's right that the government puts it right. Although, of course, this goes back many, many, many years, and finding adequate recourse and recompense is going to be very difficult.
It's interesting because we've already had people saying that if we'll hear, of course, from the Prime Minister, we'll bring out to you live here on Talk. We also know that tomorrow we're going to hear information about compensation and the level of compensation. And there are taxpayers who are saying, hold on a second, we paid the NHS, the clinicians, for the government ministers and the civil servants who covered this up. We paid their salaries. Indeed, in some cases, some of them are dead, but in some cases we're paying their pensions. Why should we then fork out yet more money of taxpayers' money for compensation? I don't think there's any suggestion that compensation shouldn't be paid, but the source of that is something that our viewers and listeners are questioning today, and I wonder what you think about that, James.
Well, I agree that the compensation culture risks getting out of control, but by the same token, it's really important that where there has been an injustice, that recompense is paid. And that's up to the government now to work out what the level should be. And again, the Prime Minister speaking in due course. But what's fascinating to hear is this. I am often beaten up as a politician because of local failings in GP surgeries or because of the NHS. I mean, right now, the NHS is receiving record sums, gargantuan sums of money. So my question to ask is, at what point is the NHS held accountable for the failings of the NHS? It's very easy bashing politicians, but as one of the politicians who wants to put things right and entered politics to do that, I think we should be holding to account, we should be investigating and bringing criminal proceedings for those who clearly have the greatest justice to answer for.
I think you make a really good point there, James, because when the Conservatives came into power, the NHS in England got £139 billion a year. Now it gets £180 billion a year. The Conservatives, the Labour gave it a lot of money as well, and I'm sure would continue to, but throwing money at the problem isn't necessarily every way to help the NHS. There needs to be reform, there needs to be accountability, and actually many reforms in the NHS are resisted. We now have NHS England, which is a sort of arm's length body, yet still there are politicians who should take some responsibility, but there are leaders of the NHS, including Amanda Pritchard, its chief executive, who I think needs to apologise today as well for this infected blood scandal, and also probably take a lot more responsibility for what the NHS does in England. And right across the UK, other NHS bosses as well. It's not just, it is about the politicians a bit, but it's not all about them, James. I think you make a very decent and reasonable point there.
Yeah, it's about collective responsibility. I mean, again, as a commanding officer of my unit in the British Army, had I been guilty of an offence or had I been held accountable for something, I would have been fired on the spot. And zero tolerance, and rightly so, for that line of work. I think that we pay our NHS executives a lot of money. I think they earn really, really gargantuan sums, and most of them earn it, yes, of course, in many ways it's a commercial job market, the list goes on. But my view is clear. Yeah. Let's hold to account. Let's make the DHSC and the NHS come clean. Let's get them investigating their own house, and let's make sure that at the same time we provide the recompense that people need, at the same time we issue necessary apology, at the same time we put things right, albeit very difficult after a long period of time. We need to make sure now that we are holding the right people to account. And the case of Fujitsu and the case of the Royal Mail, and the list goes on, it's all about making sure that those who are due to face criminal proceedings do so.
Well, let's tap into that military knowledge and foreign affairs expertise that you have as well, James, and that's actually the reason we asked you to come on the programme in the first place. So the International Criminal Court seeking arrest warrants for both Benjamin Netanyahu and the leader of Hamas, Gaza, Yahya Sinwar. What do you make of that?
Yeah, very interesting. I've just been sitting through the statement, actually. Andrew Mitchell was at the dispatch box discussing that, and he made the
Deputy
point,
Foreign Secretary, yeah.
Yeah, he made the point that he wasn't convinced that the ICC has that jurisdiction in law. I actually asked him to confirm what might happen next, what the impact of those potential arrest warrants might be. But again, the point I raised is that the scope and the timing of this seems to imply, and there's a danger that it might be implied, that there's some kind of moral equivalence between the two sides. That is not the case. That cannot be the case. But quite clearly, the fighting must stop at the earliest opportunity, and it may well be that the ICC has a role in that. And
just one final question about Ibrahim Raisi, the Iran's president, killed in the helicopter crash alongside the foreign minister there as well. This is very destabilising for the whole region.
Yeah, I agree. Look, I mean, I'm not going to sort of inflame all the Twitter nonsense that we've seen today. The loss of life for anyone is tragic, and clearly there are families involved. But by the same token, I think we need to look very carefully at what the impact might now be on the regime. I suspect that the Iranians won't change their approach in terms of the loss of life. And I think we need to wait and see who steps forward next, who gets the mantle. But quite clearly, the Iranians need to be brought to the table a lot more than they have been. They need to start complying with international law. They need to be people that we can work with. And it may well be that a change of personality at the top allows us to do that.
James Sunderland, thank you. He is MP for Bracknell. He's a Conservative. Colonel James Sunderland, thank you very much indeed.